Good morning. I'm Ann Ariano, and I serve on the board of this church's trustees. I welcome everyone to our service this morning and welcome visitors to our open and inclusive community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another as we explore these paths. I would like to especially welcome our guests and welcome again those who have visited before. It is the custom of our congregation to have visitors stand and give your name and where you are from, if you are comfortable doing so. Are there any visitors who would like to introduce themselves today? Hi.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Belangi. I am from Caribou, Maine. We have a very small congregation up there at the moment.
Great, welcome.
Good morning, I'm Bob Polinsky. I grew up here, but I've been living in Gainesville, Florida for 30 years. And we have a medium-sized congregation down there.
Great, welcome. Wonderful, well, welcome, and, oops, one more.
I'm Jim Best. I'm listening for the first time.
Great, welcome. Please join us all after the service for coffee hour, or actually it's lemonade hour in the summer. We would love to have a chance to get to know you better. Usually our Director of Religious Education, Steve Cooper, is here. He is currently on the way to our Midwest UU summer gathering, but our Congregational Life Coordinator, Mary Law, and all of our members, any of our members, are eager to meet you. I will also be present after the service in Creeves Hall and would be happy to speak to you as well. Our service can be heard outside the glass doors at the back of the sanctuary, should you feel the need to leave the room for any reason. There are chairs provided back there. And as we begin our service, please silence all electronic devices. Thank you.
We light our chalice this morning for acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Good morning and welcome. Today we will consider beauty and imperfection. When you heard that this month's theme was beauty, what image or sound or words came to mind? This is the image that came to my mind. A perfect pink flower with evenly spaced petals and undisturbed pollen at its center, the blue sky in the background. I could imagine the petals still silky smooth like a new flower, and the scent of the flower at its peak. And then, because I like to challenge myself and because I have been well trained by my mother, the gardener, I thought, that doesn't look like a native flower. Pat Clancy, a native flower would be better. What native flower would be beautiful to me? And I thought of one of my favorite flowers, butterfly milkweed. It's one of the plants that monarch butterflies, well, it's one of the plants, I think the only plant, that monarch butterflies rely on to feed their young. It has joyous, bright orange flowers that are the same color as the butterflies. And then, completely unbidden, another image came to mind. The same milkweed plant in the fall, its sunny flowers now transformed into dirt brown seed pods, dried and cracked. The hopeful seeds of next spring bursting forth from the mother plant. They're flying into the unknown, while the milkweed plant, bent and broken, has given them sustenance, knowing that winter is coming, and it bends to the earth and lets them fly free. The perfect pink daisy catches my attention. It stands out from the imperfect world, but the dried and cracked milkweed plant holds a beauty that inspires me during difficult times. It has an imperfect beauty that holds within it a meaningful story. And this is the beauty they invite us to contemplate today. So it is now time to gather for a story for all ages. Usually our Director of Religious Education reads this story, but I'll take a gander at it today. We will remain in our seats for the story, and then during the following hymn, the children will go out to their activities. So today we have a story about knitting and beauty and doing a good deed for someone, which for Jewish people is called a mitzvah. The story is titled A Hat for Mrs. Goldman. When Sophia was a tiny baby, Mrs. Goldman next door knit her a tiny hat to keep her warm. Now Sophia is big, and she makes the pom-poms for Mrs. Goldman's hats. Hats for the tiniest babies, hats for small, medium, and large friends and neighbors. Mrs. Goldman taught her how. Keeping kepis warm is our mitzvah, Mrs. Goldman says, kissing the top of Sophia's head. This is your kepi, and a mitzvah is a good deed. Sophia and Mrs. Goldman bundle up to walk Mrs. Goldman's dog, Fifi. Winter is almost here. Fifi wears her dinosaur sweater. Sophia wears her fuzzy kitten hat and matching mittens. Mrs. Goldman made them all. An icy wind blows Mrs. Goldman's hair right and left. It turns her ears pink. "Where is your hat?" asks Sophia. "I gave it to Mrs. Chen," she explains. "Mrs. Goldman's kepi must be cold," worries Sophia. At home, Sophia thinks and worries. She worries and thinks. Mrs. Goldman needs a hat. Who will make one for her? Not Mrs. Goldman. She's too busy knitting hats for everyone else. Last year, Mrs. Goldman taught Sophia how to knit. "I only like making pom-poms," Sophia decided after a few days. "Knitting is hard, and it takes too long." Now Sophia digs out the knitting bag Mrs. Goldman gave her, and the hat they started. The stitches are straight and even. The soft wool smells like Mrs. Goldman's chicken soup. Sophia holds the needles and tries to remember what to do. She drops one stitch, she drops another. Still, Sophia knits on. She wants to make Mrs. Goldman the most special hat in the world. The next day, when Sophia and Mrs. Goldman walk Fifi, tiny fluffs of snow fall on Mrs. Goldman's head. Her ears are bright red. Mrs. Goldman's kepi must be very cold, frets Sophia. So she knits after breakfast, she knits after lunch, she knits after dinner. She even knits while Mama reads her a bedtime story. But Sophia does not knit when she is at Mrs. Goldman's house. The hat is a surprise. All week there is frost on the windows, and one day when they are walking Fifi, Mrs. Goldman wraps Mr. Goldman's scarf around her head like a mummy. A fierce wind unwraps it and flings it up high, and Sophia jumps and grabs an end of the scarf. Fifi nips at the other end. Mrs. Goldman's cappy must be freezing, shivers Sophia. Oh. So she knits and knits and knits, faster and faster and faster, stitch by stitch, row by row, and then Sophia sews, and at last Mrs. Goldman's hat is done. Sort of. The hat is lumpy and bumpy. There are holes where there should not be holes. It looks like a monster hat, thinks Sophia. She turns the hat over and around and inside out. Mrs. Goldman's hat should not be a monster hat that will scare Fifi. Sophia opens up the box of hats Mrs. Goldman made her. Each one is special, but they are all too small for Sophia now. They are way too small for Mrs. Goldman. Sophia looks in the hall closet. There are hats Mrs. Goldman made for Mama and Papa. She can't give her their hats. There is a scratchy old hat Sophia's abuela wore back in Mexico. Worse than Mr. Goldman's scarf. Sophia thinks about Mrs. Goldman and the hats they make together. Your pom-poms add beauty, Mrs. Goldman tells her, and that's a mitzvah too. Sophia feels her heart grow bigger and lighter like a balloon. She searches her room for red yarn. Red is Mrs. Goldman's favorite color. She gathers her scissors, her sewing needle, her stack of index cards, and she gets busy, very busy. When Sophia is done, Mrs. Goldman's hat is the most special hat in the world. Sophia rushes next door. Surprise! For me? Asks Mrs. Goldman. For you, answers Sophia. It's a hat. Of course it is, exclaims Mrs. Goldman, and she hugs Sophia, and then she cries. What's wrong? Asks Sophia. Don't you like it? I more than like it. I love it, declares Mrs. Goldman. It's gorgeous, like Mr. Goldman's rose bushes, and you know how I love his roses. Mrs. Goldman kisses Sophia on top of her kepi. I made it all by myself, Sophia tells her. It is amazing, and will you look at all the pom-poms? 1, 2, 3, 4, counts Mrs. Goldman, and Sophia joins in. There are 20 red pom-poms on Mrs. Goldman's hat, each one made with love. She gently puts the hat on. The next day, Sophia and Mrs. Goldman walk Fifi. Fifi wears her dinosaur sweater. Sophia wears her fuzzy kitten hat and matching mittens. Mrs. Goldman wears her Sophia hat. Her kepi is toasty warm, and that's a mitzvah. And now I invite you to join us in singing hymn number 1053, How Could Anyone Ever Tell You? Vera will play it through once, and then we'll sing it twice, and the children will go to their activities after the first time we sing it through. Now is the time in our service that we set aside for joys and concerns. So you all may or may not know that I am a recovering perfectionist. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I say that both jokingly and seriously. I have suffered from what I consider an addiction to perfection for a good portion of my life. And I've recently begun to learn to view this addiction for what it is. My desire for perfection in every aspect of my life, getting good grades, being pretty but not too pretty, being an ideal daughter and teacher and wife and mother, I don't even know what else, has resulted in my avoiding failure, even the possibility of failure, and it has led to anxiety, depression, insomnia, and disconnection from the loving and the lovable people in my life. It prevents me from thriving. In its extremity, it could prevent me from surviving, and yet I cling to it. It's confusing to say the least. But I have many teachers in my life that are helping me to guide my path. And funnily enough, one of my best friends, Heidi Parks, who is now also my employer, I'm her assistant, She is an almost perfect opposite. She is an inspiration in imperfection. She is an artist, quilter, and now professional mender, and she fully embraces the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, which I do not know a great deal about. She has educated me. It appreciates, she says, the perfect mistake, accident, or collaboration with nature. That's what I said this morning when I woke up and my hair was really funky. I was like, well, I collaborated with nature. When we took ceramics class together, I was making molds and producing identical pieces of pottery, and she was trying to convince the instructor that it would be okay for her to make something completely asymmetrical, and could she crack the outside of the clay, right? She remains one of my greatest teachers. We learn from each other continually. I helped her survive chemistry, and she helps me survive adult life. Seems uneven. I'll tell you more about her later, but one of my newest teachers is the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron. In her book, Start Where You Are, she writes, if an experience is delightful or pleasant, usually we want to grab it and hold on. We want to make it last. We're afraid that it will end. We're not inclined to share it. The Buddhist Lojong teachings encourage us, if we enjoy what we are experiencing, to think of other people and wish the same for them. Share the wealth, be generous with your joy, give away what you most want. What then would you give away? I am here today to give away what I most want, to be accepted as I am in all my imperfections as I navigate this journey of life, and to accept myself as I am in all my imperfections. A gift that no one truly can give away, but we try. Buddhist meditation teachings, as well as the spiritual practice of mending, inspire me to love all of the parts of myself, even the parts that are uneven or smelly or imperfect, like jealousy and pride and imperfection. I still love perfect beauty. It was the first thing that occurred to me, right? And I think it is still healthy to bathe our minds and souls in beauty through music and food and dance and all other art forms. However, as Chodron points out, our desire to hold this beauty always and to seek the most perfect beauty, unchanging, will only leave us anxious. How much more beauty is there to see in the world when we accept the inherent beauty in many imperfect things? Mrs. Goldman saw this beauty. Presented with a slightly lumpy hat littered with holes, covered with pom-poms that clashed with the other colors, she saw a gift of the heart, an imperfect object, one transformed by unconditional love into true and transcendent beauty. Just like every one of us, imperfect objects transformed by unconditional love into a true and transcendent beauty.
The images in Adam Jagajewski's poem, Try to Praise the Mutilated World, recall a trip he and his father made to their homeland within Ukraine, villages emptied under Stalin's regime. The poem forces us to consider whether we can embrace the beauty of an imperfect world. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of rosé wine, the nettles that methodically overgrow, the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners joyfully sing. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where the music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and the gray feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns.
So I mentioned that one of the ways that I have learned to embrace imperfection is through mending, which I consider a spiritual practice for me. I can understand that it could also just be a labor of not love, but for me it is a spiritual practice. My first mending project was a pair of rainbow knit gloves that I refused to part with. Even beyond their beauty and the subtle nod to gay rights, they were the only wool gloves I had ever found that did not itch. I wore them to work in Arkansas when I only needed them in what they consider to be the depths of winter. And I wore them on walks at home in Illinois, when of course I had to layer them with polar fleece to make it down the block. They were stained with tea and coffee, with the tears that you only get from a brisk winter wind, with the water of 100 fall and spring rainstorms. And if you held them close, you might detect the faint smell of wood smoke from New Year's Eve fires held with my friends. They had developed a gentle curve that matched my fingers, probably because I didn't wash them often enough. And they began to wear through on the right thumb and forefinger, where I open door handles, where I hold the steering wheel. I ignored this for a while. I guess I thought it might go away. But eventually there were actual holes in the gloves. My thumb and finger were cold, and another worn spot had begun on my middle finger, and then on my other thumb. Soon the gloves would not even keep me warm. But I refused to throw them away. I put them on a shelf and used other gloves and mittens, until one day I missed them so much that I found some brightly colored yarn that sort of matched, and I tried to mend them. I had only ever seen one picture of mending, a line drawing of how to darn a sock by weaving yarn. But I was desperate. I really, really loved these gloves. And anyway, they were broken. Why not try to fix them? I struggled with the mending process. It was time-consuming to make a patch that was as big as it really needed to be to cover the entire worn area, and I was impatient that it be fixed now. And it was surprisingly difficult to make a patch that had the same flexibility and tension as the original fabric, so that it wouldn't just continue to tear more. I definitely left a few inconvenient lumps. But I found that each time I mended them, I liked them even more. They now held not just the memories of all of the times that I had worn them, but the work of my own hands. I had made parts of them. And my love for them was now clear to everyone that saw them. No matter what they thought of it, they knew I loved those gloves. And at that point, and they had also only become more brightly rainbow colored. Yes, that was an extra benefit. But at that point, mending was still just a means of getting what I wanted, my gloves, back to normal, as close as I could get them. Then about a year later, my friend Heidi, who I mentioned earlier, informed me that what I was doing was hip and fashionable. This was a shock. That doesn't usually happen to me, but it turns out that visible mending has become increasingly popular, which is repairing a garment in such a way that it does not hide the original hole or imperfection, but highlights it. This practice had struck a strong chord for her for many reasons. It was much more economical, and it was much more environmentally friendly. It embraced the artistic philosophy of wabi-sabi that permeates her artwork and her very life. Most importantly of all, mending allowed her to continue wearing the clothes that fit her and were comfortable. And let me tell you, in women's fashion, that is a serious victory. Amen. She is taught me a great many things over the years since then, both about how to mend and about how we mend. One of the most powerful things she has taught me about it is how it allows a garment to tell a story. Remember what I said about my gloves and noticing where I held the steering wheel, which I would never have noticed until I needed to mend them. Heidi mended her father's jeans for several years before he passed away. He wore them proudly. He even showed off the men's to complete strangers because he was a woodworker and a great appreciator of handwork himself. And the most common mend she did for him was on the right knee. They had never noticed before, but once she started mending, they realized how he would always kneel down in his work life and just the rest of his life on his right knee. And it became a joke between the two of them. And now, after his death, they are a potent reminder of her love for him and of his for her. A powerful reminder of the tiny everyday habits and details that make up a beloved person, which seem so small, and yet they loom so large in our memories of them. Heidi described the process of mending to me in this way. We make clothes, and we wear them. And then nature takes a turn and wears them thin. And then it's our turn again to mend them, and then nature takes over again, and on and on and on. The clothes tell the story of our collaboration with nature and life. For me, mending brings with it a sense of closeness to the entire material world. Like my mended gloves, I am being used up. I too am impermanent and worn and imperfectly patched. I am also loved and experienced and worth the work and practice required to lead a fulfilling life. And I truly believe that all of us are. It is now time to take the offering. Our church, like all human enterprises, is also imperfect and worn and mended many times. Through our resources of volunteerism and our financial gifts, we allow it to grow even more imperfectly beautiful. The offering for the work of this church will now be given and gratefully received.
invite you now to contemplate this excerpt from an article by Joan Tollefson, published in the book Being Bodies, Buddhist Women on the Paradox of Enlightenment. In this essay, she writes about the experience of being a Buddhist meditator with a disability. Meditation is in every moment, not just something I do in a special place, in a particular form. It is simply being here. Babies and animals automatically live this way. They approach my arm, the one that ends just below the elbow, without ideas. They aren't frightened or repulsed by it. They don't feel sorry for me. They don't think I'm heroic or amazing. They see the actual shape of what's in front of them without concepts or labels. They don't see it this way because they're practicing meditation or trying to be enlightened. It just happens. And the same simple seeing happens for us, too, every moment. The only problem is that for us, it tends to get obscured by our belief in the reality of all the thoughts that arise, and particularly by our belief in the central thought of me as somebody separate from the totality, somebody who is somehow incomplete, not quite right, and in need of fixing. Living with disability, like all forms of upset and disappointment, is a gift if we work with it intelligently, as an opportunity to see and question our images, ideals, expectations, our basic desire to be different than we are. As these mental constructions become more transparent and begin to unravel, beauty reveals itself right here and now, where we least expected to find it. Meditation teaches me that perfection is life as it actually is from moment to moment. Asymmetrical, messy, unresolved, out of control, imperfect, terrible, and miraculous.
Like mending, meditation is another way I have found to embrace imperfection in my life, and it parallels mending as a spiritual practice in many ways. My most memorable meditation experience took place next door to a racquetball practice session. Heidi and I took a class on meditation together at a fitness center, and my teacher, Indu Aurora, explained to us over the thumpity thump 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 next door that this was the perfect opportunity to practice our meditation. We so often picture a meditation retreat next to a waterfall, far from the real everyday life, with only the scent of honeysuckle and wax candles and the sound of goldfinches to guide our way to enlightenment. But what meditation really is, Indu explained, is fully embracing the present with all the sounds, whatever that was earlier, all the sounds and all the smells and all of the aches and pains, and to hold them without judging them. Meditation is hard. Meditating next to a waterfall is easy, but meditating is hard. This is how Lam Ka Lo meditated in front of riot police at a demonstration this month against an extradition order in Hong Kong. When I'm stressed out and give up on being fully present, when I am trying to do dishes and the toddler is crying and the phone is ringing and I still have a pile of unfinished work and a house that's half cleaned and I know that never happens to anyone else, I remember racquetball practice. And that I can be in tune with my emotions and imperfections and still not controlled by what I think about all of them, which is, I'm not enough, I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. But here I am still. And mending is the same. It's easy for me to fall back into an attitude of perfectionism, to trim the hole so that it's symmetrical, to make it evenly stitched, to make it Pinterest-worthy. Is it Pinterest-worthy? But this is the clinging attitude that Pima Chodron warns against. Mending is far more realistic and earthy and imperfect. For example, do you know what mend Heidi does most often? Crotch mends. Seriously. And if you've never had a hole in the crotch of your pants, you're either lying or you know someone who does. Even if they haven't told you. You know me. And I am usually mending the worn seat of my pants, the butt. It's not polite, it's not sterile, it's not sanitized. I don't even know why it is. And that's because imperfect beauty is life as it is lived, not as we think it should be. It's right here, it's right now, in all of its glories and its failures and everything in between. I suspect that most of us mend, though perhaps not clothing. I invite you now into a time of contemplation. What do you find solace in mending, rather than throwing away completely or giving up on? It might be clothes. It might be appliances or relationships. Perhaps computer programs. Let me tell you, they need mending. I live with a computer programmer. It might be automobiles. It might be religion. The biodiversity of your own backyard. Racial injustice. Who has mended for you? Who have you mended for? Do you have crotch mends? Do you have holes that you are just not ready to mend yet? How then shall we seek beauty? I think we need to pay attention to perfect beauty, yes, but with more efforts seeking out imperfect beauty. Pay attention to our anger and our loneliness, as well as our joy and our laughter. And then let them go. Welcome the next moment. May we find beauty here and now, especially when it is hard. And now I invite you into a time of meditation. You can choose whatever position is comfortable for you. Your mind may be full of thoughts on mending, and that's okay. We can start to let those thoughts go now, like balloons on strings, like clouds that pass in the summer sky. During the meditation, if you find yourself judging and thinking rather than observing, you can simply notice that fact and let the thought go. Notice your breath. Notice your exhalation. Notice the sounds in the room. Let any judgments go like balloons on strings. Notice your fingers and your feet. Notice what your body is feeling. Notice your breath. Call your attention to your fingertips and begin to rub them gently in small circles or any other small movement. Rub your hands, and when you are ready, open your eyes. Welcome back to our imperfect space. And now I invite us to join in singing hymn number 354, A Promise Through the Ages Rings. Vera will play it through once, and then we'll sing the first two verses. peace and grow in love. May our pursuit of beauty bring us closer, ever closer to that which we do not understand, and thus bring us closer to ourselves. Thank you, and enjoy lemonade.